looking at Bitcoin and Lightning in particular, and some of its pseudonymous features as a way of keeping the government out of our business when it comes to digital money. And I think that's something that we need to remind our friends on the right side of the aisle about this as we move in, because that's something that they talk about caring about too, from the libertarian mindset of they want privacy. I think there is a huge opportunity for an Overton window where there can be general agreement that we don't want the government in our business when it comes to digital currency.
Here's the Progressive Bitcoiner with Margot Paez.
There needs to be some selling point for Bitcoin actually as a money too. We need it as a money for the people. And if there's a way that government can find regulation to actually stay out of people's business in a way, maybe it's just too much of a dream there. But that's probably something after number go up that we really, really, really need.
Yeah, I agree. And for our listeners who are just tuning in, I just wanted to bring them into our conversation with Jason Brett. And we had a really fantastic discussion about the election, post-election, where where progressives fit into this whole new Trump Republican landscape. We went across quite a few things, Patrick. I mean, we touched on regulation. We talked a little bit about Trump's personality, the cult of personality of Trump, I would say, where the Harris campaign went wrong.
The Harris campaign thinking about a crypto Bitcoin approach 1.5 weeks after Kamala Harris announced her running for president. And we all know how much it takes to learn about Bitcoin, how much education, how much time and effort you need.
The question is, what comes out of that, of friendly crypto legislation? Again, it's like, what is this regulation going to ultimately do for the ethos of Bitcoin? Do we want Bitcoin to become part of the system, or do we want Bitcoin to stay out of the system, right? I think that there's this internal struggle around that as a community, I don't think that we've really been willing to openly address. The motivations from David Bailey, for example, or Michael Saylor are very different from the motivations of, let's say, myself or even you or Callie with eCash, right?
Well, politicians are going to use it for their purpose. Businesses are already using it for their purposes. And then Michael Saylor is not going to be the first and not the last one who does it. He just advertises a lot, and he has his intentions with using it, which is, gaining wealth.
Really, my goal is I want politicians to be neutral about Bitcoin. I don't want them to like it, and I don't want them to hate it. I actually don't want them to really care about it. Because I think as soon as they start caring about it, that's where we really get into this space of, well, what do they think about it, and what role does it play in this whole landscape of the state? And it concerns me that we've become so tied to political parties, because ultimately the motivation of the state is to wield a certain amount of power over people. And Bitcoin takes some of that power away. The integration of Bitcoin into the system, the question is what comes after that. Is it that, because I think, Patrick, people say Bitcoin is just going to eat it. It's going to eat the system once it comes into the system, like a Trojan horse. I feel like that's really idealistic. I see so many things that get co-opted into the system or into the state, and they're never the same. Bitcoin has a certain, because of the decentralization, but I don't think that it's immune to this.
I've actually never been a big fan of the entire Trojan horse meme, because I think what we're witnessing is the world, the society of the world embracing a new technology, something on a scale as we haven't seen it since the invention of the printing press, 500 years ago. And this time it's not just happening in a small town in Europe, spreading out over the continent, religion being the first ones who found a use case for it, and this took ages. Now we're in a globalized world with the internet, and it's based on the internet, and we're seeing this being enrolled and being discussed everywhere. I think all we need is just we need to have curiosity everywhere and spark curiosity wherever we can, and have people figure out how it supports them, how it helps their issues. And yes, we're going to see people that we absolutely hate embrace it, maybe earlier than people that we would love to embrace it. But this is part of what technology is. It's there for everyone. We can just go out to everyone that we care about and tell them, look into this, make your own mind about it, and see how it fits for your purpose that you're seeing for a better world.
Yeah, I always think that, or I hope anyway, that there will always still be a way to use Bitcoin as resistance money, even if its ultimate goal, if it ultimately just ends up a toy of Wall Street. If we end up with most of the hash rate in the US, that doesn't make me feel very comfortable. But I know some people in the space are pushing for stuff like that, and Trump has said that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there.
I don't hope for this kind of regulation fast. I hope this goes very slow, because every hour, every day, every week that we have, that this takes longer and keeps Bitcoin away from Wall Street is a day longer that people are going to be able to talk to people and help them, send money from continent to continent back to their families after they migrated or whatever. This is,
Yeah.
I really hope we have time. And if this is a counter argument for number go up, so be it. That I'm the anti number go up advocate here, but it's important that people have the time to find out about the benefits of Bitcoin, because it's not like the printing press. It's not rolling out over the world over centuries. It's happening extremely fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. You said everything. I think I'm completely in agreement. That is my hope too. I don't know if we're winning in that front, but we have to keep trying. I don't think we should give up. So yeah, it's a interesting time. I mean, we'll see what happens, but I think we should probably wrap up and let the viewers get in with this interview. And of course, stick around to the end. We'll have our Bitcoin moment of Zen. So Patrick, I'll hand it off to you. Let's get us into the interview.
I'll just press play.
To be the ASIC going or the money printer going burr, right? Who knows?
Yeah, it's going burr. The Bitcoin price went down to 98.
Oh, it's dead again?
That's it, everyone.
Terrible.
It's over.
It's over.
Definitely over.
Party's over. All right. Well, let's get into this because we have a lot to cover. So, yeah, I just want to thank you, Jason, for joining us. And for our listeners who don't know Jason Brett formerly served as a regulator at the FDIC during the last financial crisis. He has extensive experience in developing and implementing successful government affairs programs for various companies, including clients of Keybridge Advisors. While serving as policy director for Consensus, he was responsible for their domestic and international policy during a key period of their growth. So, Jason, thank you again. I think this is not your first time on the show, but definitely your first time with me. So we're starting on a whole new clean slate here. So it's as if you were never here, as far as I know. So a lot has happened, though. I think the last time we saw each other was in Las Vegas, and we were both doing the Bitcoin Magazine election coverage. I'm really curious, what were your thoughts about that night?
So it's funny you say that because, as you know, I'm a Democrat, and I made that public on the show. And there were a few times when I had to kind of go backstage, and at the risk of our Republican counterparts, making fun of me later, I was really sad. This was I think people are still shocked, right, by the results that we have lost the trifecta, right? The House, the Senate, the president. So there are a couple times that it was tough doing that broadcast, feeling all those numbers coming in, seeing the excitement from the other side. At the same time, I was excited to see how people believe in the opportunity of Bitcoin and see the hope that it can provide. But you yourself faced a little bit of, rough sort of commentary. And I don't know about you, but for me, after the election, it's been almost this process of like, didn't anybody ever learn what sportsmanlike conduct was? Like they're still excited about the facts so much to the point that I'm like, when is it going to end? And I think that's we can talk more about that, but I think that's my honest view was I enjoyed the broadcast. We know all the same people. I love all the same people there and everything. But and it's like, well, you don't talk about politics at work. And we were at a political event all day that had two different sides to it.
Yeah, I was feeling a little bit of hostility there towards the end. It was a little uncomfortable. It's a bit weird because obviously, yeah, I'm also raised in a family that has voted Democrat since since FDR, before FDR, right? As far as I know, and it's I really don't like Kamala Harris. I don't like Joe Biden. I have a lot of problems with the Democratic Party, but I really felt like I'm here. It's just a couple of us that are not here as Trump supporters that I have to push it a little bit more. I've got to be a little more strong on the let's go, Democrats. So it was weird to be in that position because there just was no one else. There was no one else except for us, really, who had to be that opposition voice there and say like, yeah, maybe she's got a chance still, So it was very surreal for me. I definitely sensed that like, oh, yeah, the celebration is pretty intense. But go ahead.
The one thing I thought was interesting, I don't know if you noticed this, is I felt like it happened that night. And since then, that leading up to that night, the issue was, yes, the Biden administration, but it was always this focus on how Elizabeth Warren was sort of pushing the narrative against Bitcoin. And then, pushing Gary Gensler to be very negative toward the industry. So it was always about Elizabeth Warren's influence over the administration and Gary Gensler. And I feel like that night, almost a switch went off where either the other side got very partisan all of a sudden, but it wasn't like, oh, Elizabeth Warren, it was all Democrats are like against this. And that to me, it was like, whoa, that it was just really hit me, that this is, and personally, I think that to try to go partisan too much in this industry has a huge amount of risk. I mean, we are still a two-party system. We could be looking at a very different scenario 2 years from now, right? So, we still have to coexist to the degree that we still have to get along on certain things. Are you going to be able to accomplish all your policy in 2 years in DC? Full well that's a huge lift to try to get anything done in 2 years. So I don't know about you, but that to me really, it was like it went from a Warren Gensler thing to just all Democrats. Blew me away.
Yeah, I think this is something that has concerned me for a long time too, is just this idea that Bitcoin can become extremely partisan. And then what does that mean for the future of the network, especially within the United States? So yeah, I am with you on that. I actually, I'm not a huge fan of Elizabeth Warren, but I did go out there and say, I'm glad that she did not get pushed out of the Senate, because it was pretty devastating to see those losses. And just the thought of the Democrats losing more seats was pretty horrifying to me. And even though she has her problems with some of her positions, she is still one of the better politicians that we have in the Democratic Party for a number of reasons, even if I dislike her for her comments and how she treated Bernie Sanders during his race and during both of their races, or her position on Bitcoin, her lack of understanding, but the world and American politics is more than those things. So I think that nuance was really lost in this discussion. And, from these, the Bitcoin world, I guess, getting into politics really seriously was missing this nuance of there's a world outside of Bitcoin still. Most people don't know what Bitcoin really is about. It's not something that influences their day-to-day life, and their economic concerns, I think, go above, our concerns about what happens to Bitcoin. So I wish that we could have had more of that conversation. But I wanted to get into a little bit more on these specifics, because I know we've just touched on Elizabeth Warren and you briefly brought up Gary Gensler. But I think talking a little bit more about Gary Gensler, because I'm a little bit surprised at this flip on Gensler. And I'm not even sure really when this happened, where we went from Gensler gets Bitcoin to like, we got to get this guy out. He's got to go first thing. And I don't quite know when this happened. I must have been really deep into my research, because next thing I know, people are like, yeah, he's terrible. But you made a comment, that, off air, obviously, that it was it wasn't so much that he was positive to Bitcoin, but that he was not positive about crypto in general. And I do remember this in particular. So I'm just wondering, I mean, what do you know about what happened around this motivation to push him out? Why VCs wanted him out? I mean, what was going on here?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of dynamics to it. First of all, if we just read Gary Gensler's speech from 2021 when he talked about Bitcoin, he'd be like the hero, right? Like he was focused on how Bitcoin is this original concept. It's different than the other coins. And, if you're into Bitcoin, that's great to hear that. He's saying he's leaving it at the CFTC. He made this joke, if someone's Satoshi Nakamoto, stand up, or if you're Satoshi Nakamoto's lawyer. But, in other words, it's not going to be a VC type coin scenario. And I tell this to everybody, but, August 3rd, 2021 changed everything, because Gary Gensler came out, and at the same time that he talked about Bitcoin, there was almost gasps in some of the audience, because you have a lot of these lawyers for the VCs for these other platforms, where he said, they're all securities, basically. And what Gensler had to do with the SEC, his move in 2021, had to do with the fact that he had very limited resources. People think that bureaucrats can just, go ahead and go after anything. They have a limited amount of time and a limited amount of people. And so instead of going after these token projects one at a time to say they were securities, what upset the industry was he went after the exchanges like Coinbase and Kraken and Gemini. And what he said to them is, come in and register. And what he meant is, you have to come in and register like you're the New York Stock Exchange. And then all the tokens are going to be securities. And a lot of the Coinbases didn't want to do that, because you're ceding so much power to that one agency. It's overreach. It was really a power grab. And you see that. I'm an ex-regulator from the FDIC, where often you see this dynamic of the SEC doesn't want to lose any turf. So they were really trying to grab power, but it was a threat to the whole VC system, right, of the tokens, of the trading, if they shut these exchanges down, right, if Coinbase and these can't operate. And so that's where I'd say the crypto side of the industry quickly turned on Gary Gensler. And then as things came out, like against Samurai Cash and other things about the illicit use, Gary Gensler really didn't speak up, for Bitcoin anymore. And that was primarily because Elizabeth Warren kind of came in and pushed about the narrative about the, as you know, the energy use of Bitcoin miners. And so he was initially a big fan of Bitcoin, but then got very quiet about it. And he was threatening the existence of these VCs and these exchanges. I mean, if anything, Gary Gensler produced the political machine, which was Coinbase and Ripple and the Fairshake Pack, that we have to remind ourselves became the number one contributor in money of any other industry in this election. Let's think about that for a second. Like, not big oil, not the Koch brothers, not, it was big crypto. They had the most influence on this election as a result of fighting back against what Gensler was pushing them on.
Yeah, this was interesting to me, because a lot of Bitcoiners really celebrated the influx of candidates that were backed by these big crypto corporations, like you said, like Ripple in particular, Chris Larson, who we had this incredible battle with on the whole, Greenpeace thing and the environmental impact of Bitcoin mining. And I found that, a little hypocritical or bizarre, kind of bizarro, because it's like, wait, you guys are like excited because Sherrod Brown got pushed out and is being replaced by this other person who was backed by Ripple and Chris Larson and Coinbase. And it's like, where are your allegiances here? I mean, are we getting, we have to be careful for what we get out of this, right? Because these people are not really looking out for the benefit of Bitcoin. They're looking out for the benefit of their own projects, their own corporations, their own companies, their own exchanges. And so I feel like, are we making a deal with the devil here?
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, Brad Garlinghouse has had meetings already with Trump. He's said he was going to be on 60 Minutes the next Sunday, but it turned out he wasn't. It's going to be a few weeks later, but still the price of XRP rose greatly as a result of this, saying he's going to be on 60 Minutes. And, he's meeting with Trump, but you have to remember Chris Larson was giving money to Kamala Harris. So it's a very interesting dynamic, right? You have Garlinghouse sort of like hedging their bets, right? Garlinghouse is going in on the Trump campaign, Chris Larson pushing on the Democrats, the Greenpeace sort of vibe. And I think that's where they find that they're able to sort of separate the two. Garlinghouse comes in sort of for the Republican, free market, let's just let XRP rip, while Larson kind of beats up on Bitcoin and does the Greenpeace thing and pushes for the Democrat, almost like an insurance policy, just in case Kamala Harris won. And that's a very typical thing you see. Not comparing them at all to FTX, but you saw that when Sam Bankman-Fried was operating on the political level, he was pushing on the Democratic side, and he had other people who were, doing the Republican side too, so working kind of both sides of the aisle. So this is pure politics. This is typical sort of lobbying perspective, and I think for a company like Ripple, they're walking that fine line where they're not going to care if like Bitcoin tries to throw down a penalty flag or says, hey, you're being, are we shooting ourselves in the foot? They're interested in Ripple and XRP. And a lot of people feel tied to them. And when I say a lot of people, that's like the whole VC community and all the other tokens, minus the meme coins, who are tied to that model. Because if XRP is shown to be a viable model and is not going to be shut down by the SEC, that means all these other tokens can come in behind and operate freely in the US.
So I think we have a lot of progressives, right, who listen to this show. It's called the Progressive Bitcoiner. And one of the things that progressives really oppose is this type of influx of super PAC money, corporate influence on politics, on elections. So they're opposed to Citizens United. And so I'm wondering, how should progressives feel about all of this, like 20 million or so that went into this election, into these congressional seats? I mean, it seems to me like this is a little bit of a contradiction of the position of progressive Democrats in this country, right? To see people going out and taking out politicians this way, rather than doing it from the bottom up, from the grassroots, from the actual constituents of these politicians saying, actually, we don't like you because you're not doing what we want, right? It seems to me like this was not a motivation from the constituent base itself, but rather from, particular groups with consolidation of a lot of money. So I'm just poking around a little bit here because I think this is an uncomfortable subject for us, and but it does happen, and it is happening. And I mean, as Democrat, I mean, like, how should progressives feel about this?
Hi everyone, hope you're enjoying the episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Bitbox. Now, Bitbox is a hardware wallet that's open source, incredibly secure and easy to use, and it's what I'm using to safely secure my Bitcoin in cold storage. Now, I know self-custodying Bitcoin can really be intimidating, but Bitbox is designed for ease of use without compromising on security. It's USB-C compatible and allows you to easily back up and restore your private keys with a micro SD card, which is really cool. Now, you can purchase the Bitbox using the promo code TPB at the link found in the show notes for 5% off your purchase. And I really want to thank Bitbox for their support of the podcast. All right, I'll let you get back to the episode now.
Look, I think Fair Shake PAC had oversized influence, and with their goal of trying to get pro-crypto people into Congress. But it doesn't work very well when you're sort of threatening them that if you're not going to take to this industry, we're going to knock you out of power. And if you look very carefully at the difference in who won the House, which is this razor thin majority that we have, you'll see, the Fair Shake PAC, even Brad Garlinghouse just said this is the most successful PAC in history. And we did bipartisanship. So we're going to have, crypto on both sides of the aisle. It's very clear the money was put into Republicans that were in battleground states, that really needed the money to kind of tip the scales to win. Whereas the Democrats who were pro-crypto mainly got those candidates got money when it was a sure thing. People who are had 99% chance of winning got money. So it was this bipartisan PAC that you could almost point to as saying possibly flip the House of Representatives, or didn't flip, but kept it to be in a Republican majority. And if you're going to have the crypto industry itself is going to have a real problem in Congress, if that perception or that understanding of what Fair Shake PAC did really kept the Democrats out of the majority, because that's not the stated mission of the super PAC, right? That's almost this byproduct or collateral damage. But the question, Margot, was that collateral damage intentional? Because they really wanted the Republicans to win because they feel that's going to benefit the crypto industry. And I think if that's the case, progressive Democrats should be really upset by this, because the Republicans need to own, or whoever it is, or the Fair Shake needs to own what this is about. If they want to have a Republican majority and be, the typical less regulation kind of thing, then that's what they should say. They shouldn't say it's this bipartisan concept. And I think that this is a very uncomfortable conversation, because you're talking about Coinbase and Fair Shake, and it's this very powerful PAC. And, some Democrats are saying they don't want to use super PACs, but already they've raised money for the 2026 election, Fair Shake super PAC. So it's becoming this giant of a behemoth that could, I wouldn't say the Democrats should see it as a threat yet, as a danger, but it's something to be really keep your eye on. And I think watching the tone and the way people speak the next 2 years from this industry to see if it's really genuinely a bipartisan. And that's where I think that's going to have to be done very carefully, not by us, but by the other side, because they could quickly alienate it to make this purely a partisan issue. And I think the industry is in a lot of danger as a result of that.
Yeah, it's very, it's a pickle. I would say it's a pickle. Okay.
So one more example of what I see this Margot, is I don't want to be so critical of Fair Shake PAC in that it was their first time. So it was they were new to the scene. They weren't necessarily experienced. They had all this money. So they maybe didn't follow all the rules of the game, and they need to learn what that is. But there were some clear unforced errors where it just wasn't clear that they were actually just trying to get pro-crypto people. And the example I always give is the case of Michelle Steele and Tran in California. So Michelle Steele got money from Fair Shake PAC during the election, and she was Republican. And her opponent, Tran, 3 days later, she attacked her opponent in Vietnamese because he owned cryptocurrency. So she was given money from a pro-crypto PAC, and then 3 days later, she attacked her Democratic counterpart because he owned crypto. So I feel like any new sort of organization like Fair Shake PAC, they need to do a little bit better due diligence than to have a candidate who's going to rail against the very thing that they gave her money for.
Wow. Yeah. Do you think that was just an oversight on their part?
Well, I think that I'm not saying that's 100% Fairshake's fault. Michelle Steele's done that before, where she tries to tie her candidates to like the Chinese Party, Communist Party. So that was sort of what that angle was. But it wasn't a good look, right? I mean, and the other thing about it too is that, we had, and like you said, whatever your feelings are about Kamala Harris, is Trump got an A, like was endorsed with a grade A on his view of Bitcoin. And he is viewed as sort of the first Bitcoin president. But we never really ever gave Kamala a grade. We gave her a B and then we pulled it back and it was like a not rated. So it's sort of like, why didn't we ever just grade her? That's important. It's a presidential election. Should it be a D? Should it be an F? If we think it's an F, then give her an F, but anyway, so I think it's just important to recognize maybe things aren't perfect. And you know what? The other element besides Michelle Steele, that back to your point about Elizabeth Warren, Margot, is Elizabeth Warren's going to be the ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee. It's going to be the most powerful Democrat in the next Senate. So she's going to be right there pushing probably against the industry at every turn because they got rid of Sherrod Brown through the Fair Shake PAC. Right. So now, so somebody who's almost more anti, Bitcoin than before. We'll see.
Well, I was just thinking, as you said, Trump was the first Bitcoin president, but I have to say Biden is the first 100K Bitcoin president. So, thank you, Joe Biden, for making that possible. Wonderful economic development under your administration, not under Trump's.
That's right. Although, of course, Trump already took credit for it and told us all, "You're welcome." So,
oh wow, so exciting! I don't know. With Trump, I just kind of take it day by day. I guess I think about when he was president in 2016 and through 2020, and I remember thinking like, okay, it can't get any worse than this. And then like a month later, okay, it can get worse, but it can't get any worse than this, right? And then, a couple of months later, oh, okay, no, absolutely. It can absolutely get worse. And then at some point I was just like, I'm done thinking that it can't get worse. I just assume it's going to get worse. I don't know how, but it will. And I feel like, Trump is incredibly unpredictable in a lot of ways in terms of what he's going to do. He says one thing, he does something else. He did a lot of that under his first administration. So when I see stuff like that, I just think, okay, but I still have no idea really what you plan to do when after your inauguration. I mean, I feel that his positions aren't trustworthy. So I don't know if we can really thank him just yet.
I agree. Yeah. And I think that one of the things I think you're going to see now that the enemy, that being the Democrats, are out of the way of the crypto industry, so to speak. And I do believe there needs to be education for Democrats for Bitcoin. I don't want to sound like, we really need to rethink a lot of things from this election. But going into as Trump takes power, we really need to think about what it is that Trump is going to face pushback on. And what you have to remember is that it isn't just Democrats that sometimes have concerns about things like Bitcoin. You have Republican senators who are very concerned about national security, how North Korea might be using Bitcoin. And there's been legislation that's been introduced in the last session from Republicans and Democrats who want to talk about things like whether it's Tornado Cash or the mixers. Even the Lummis Gillibrand bill, they worked with Warren to talk about, how to maybe watch carefully what's happening with the mixers. So what I'm trying to say is that when we look at the composition of this Congress and what's going to happen when Trump tries to move forward with things, he might try to move things in a way where people want him to be very positive toward Bitcoin, but he may get pushback from his own party, right? Not Democrats, but Republicans who are worried about national security and want to do things, in a way to protect, like when you look at some of the things like breaking encryption or whatever it is. So there's going to be a bit of a reckoning, and it's not just going to be from one side of the aisle or the other. It's going to be a combination of things.
Yeah, I think we're kind of moving more into this direction about the regulatory environment right now, including the Bank Secrecy Act. But before we get into that, I wanted to stay a little bit longer on the election side, because I know you were involved with Crypto for Harris. And I was really curious about how you got involved with this organization, and also the feedback you got from people, or even backlash that you got. I think Nick Carter was not so happy with Bitcoiners being involved with this organization. And yeah, I think it'd be great for the audience to hear about what that experience was like, because I think also for a little while, Trey was involved a little bit as well, and Jason Mayer. I mean, how did you get involved with this? What was the core mission? Obviously, Crypto for Harris, but what was the goal?
Yeah, by no means was I like a leader of Crypto for Harris. They were doing fundraisers across the country, and so I was helping in my area, and I started helping toward the end of its cycle. I think the goal was to try to keep things in a bipartisan way and try to help instruct the Harris campaign on what their position should be regarding Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. I think, unfortunately, when we look back on it, there was not a lot of reception from the campaign at all for the space. There just wasn't interest in hearing from industry. And so that left, I think, the organization kind of high above its skis, right? Kind of like left out in nowhere's land. And I think, speaking very feelingly as a former regulator, a lot of people, I think, saw this election as a way of, if we had to get Biden out because of a lot of the Operation Choke Point and activities, we needed a clean house. And I think to them, the idea of Crypto for Harris, and the reason why there's been so much concern with that, is because they saw this at trying to keep it as the status quo. Like, I'm a former regulator. It infuriates me when people get debanked. I've dealt with that in my practice with clients, watching them when they have to go from one bank to another. That's not at all what Crypto for Harris was trying to do. But I think people thought it as like some sort of apology or apologist for like what happened during the Biden administration. I'll be very straight with you. I'm not sure I even know what the goal was specifically of Crypto for Harris. I think it was sort of a movement that got put together very quickly, because as we know, Harris had a very limited time in office. I think that this concept, though, has made me personally slightly uncomfortable when I've seen like Nick Carter and other go on saying, I want a list of all the people who've been part of Crypto for Harris, and I'm going to remember them. I'm kind of like, to me, I've been in this space for 8 years. I'm a Democrat. I believe in working together in bipartisanship. And that, to me, was what it was about. Crypto for Harris, for me, at the end of the day, whatever people think about it, for me personally, I can sleep well at night because I feel like we gave their campaign and Harris a shot to explain what they were going to do with Bitcoin and crypto. And she mentioned digital assets. And you know what? Even Republicans, even Congressman Patrick McHenry the other day said he didn't credit Crypto for Harris for this, but he said he thought it was really good to hear Harris talk about digital assets, that was a positive development, because that was a step away from the way the administration had been so negative on it. So I feel like we had made a little bit of a dent. Maybe it was a lack of time. Maybe, again, it goes back to education, Margot, and understanding, which is why we need you and the show and Democrats to learn about Bitcoin more and more, But I think at the end of the day, like it wasn't the best organized outfit. I don't think the backlash it's getting is right or appropriate, especially since these are some of the same people that I know and see at conferences and do business with. So I think that people maybe got a little ahead of themselves with the politics and the feelings and the anger they had about what was happening with the debanking. Look, you can be unhappy with an administration and the policies about what they do, whether it's the border or whatever. But the minute that we lose civility or the ability to have conversations with each other in a rational way, that's when democracy starts to go out the door.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask you about this because it seems to me that the Harris campaign had some missteps in different places. And it's, particular with the whole crypto in general industry and the Democrats in general seemingly not taking the industry seriously, not wanting to engage. I mean, we saw that David Bailey and co. were able to go to Mar-a-Lago, meet with Trump, and convince him to endorse Bitcoin and to commit to pardoning Ross Ulbricht, right? And I heard from people at Bitcoin Magazine telling me they were trying to get something similar from the Democrats, but they could not get a commitment from them, or even to get Harris to come and speak. And you could say, okay, well, it's just Bitcoin. But on the other hand, they also had missed opportunities as well. And I think this was a really pivotal moment where Joe Rogan had Trump on for a 3-hour podcast, and the Harris campaign declined this. And I thought, this is fascinating because Bernie Sanders had no problem going on Joe Rogan. So what is the problem? Why are they afraid to do this? And I'm wondering if they just thought that they could play the same game that they had been playing politically for a long time, that they could rely on the same, political pundits in the cable news networks and particular news outlets to get their message out, newspapers, and that they didn't realize that somehow this got past them, that the world is changing around them. The internet has really changed the landscape. And I'm just wondering if they just didn't see this, and that this was really a missed opportunity. And I'm wondering if you think that coming into these next elections, like we'll have another midterm cycle. Do you think that they might reflect on this, and we might actually see a more willingness to engage with groups like Crypto for Harris or some of these other blockchain organizations that are more permanent, that are out there and lobbying on Capitol Hill regularly?
Yeah. One thing I'll say is, and again, I'm not a spokesperson for Crypto for Harris or, a surrogate for the Democratic Party, but I think probably Crypto for Harris needs to be retired at this point. We need to come up with sort of a new strategy on how to educate Democrats. And what I mean by that is trying to court one particular person and what their feelings are about a subject. And what I will say, though, is in fairness to the Harris campaign, I think it's very fair what you talked about with Joe Rogan and pitting that as an example. That is a missed opportunity. But, I know David Bailey reached out. They tried to get Harris to come, but that was almost a week and a half after she had become the presumptive nominee. That is asking a lot, to have her figure out what her policies are going to be about one specific area. And, they already had really gone in heavily for Trump. They raised a lot of money for Trump at that conference. So, I think that maybe that was early on in a very short cycle for a campaign. So I kind of give her a break on that. However, it was a combination of, like people say, like it was Barron Trump's idea for Trump to go on podcast, and no one was in Harris's camp saying you need to kind of talk to the people. And that's what, to me, has been lost here is like, also, Trump, I think, in their campaign made much more effective use of technologies like AI or, figuring out how to message things to people in a way Democrats really weren't taking advantage of. So I think the Democrats need to become a little more sophisticated in the next 2 years in their campaigning and their messaging if we're going to be competitive and try to win back the House. And I think that they're going to have to see this as something where, to me, Harris just wasn't really a retail politician, right? She hadn't done the groundswell work that most people do to get to that point, whether that's the fault of Biden because he didn't step aside early or where the position she was sort of thrust into. It's hard to say. But at the end of the day, though, she did become the nominee. And I think pointing out things like not going on the Joe Rogan podcast was a huge misstep, right? Not exposing yourself more and letting more feelings and more thoughts flesh out. And I think that's what got a lot of people worried is it wasn't just crypto for Harris. It seemed like any issue. Taxes, it wasn't clear what her policies really were or had she even baked them out. So I don't know what her role is going to be future. I wish her well if she wants to try to, I've heard maybe she wants to try to become the governor of California or whatever. But I think we need to look to new leadership now. I don't know who that's going to be, whether maybe it's going to be Shapiro or Newsom, their governor and what their views are. I've had a chance of talking to Gavin Newsom when he came out to my state in Pennsylvania. And I know he has feelings about how he wants to court the Bitcoin and crypto community back to the Democrats. So I think people like that is what we need to look to. And like you said, have it be a real groundswell of support, like a true grassroots movement. So why Democrats believe this is a specific industry where Bitcoin can be helpful to them versus just we need to have it to even out against what the other party's doing. I think we all need to take a long break from politics. Everybody, me included, go to some island, come back in January refreshed, and just start thinking about going back to the basics.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this merger of Bitcoin and political parties is just not something I was ready for. And honestly, for me, the Nashville conference that David put on was really a massive Trump rally. I mean, you were getting these free Ross t-shirts for free, and one of them was vote Trump on it. It was like free Ross, vote Trump. And the other one was like day one, free Ross, day one. Obviously, I went with the day one. I was like, I'm not wearing a vote Trump shirt. But I mean, this was what was being offered as merchandise, free merchandise at this conference. And yeah, it was really my least favorite conference that I've been to. It just didn't feel like a Bitcoin conference. The whole layout, and then we had TSA there, checking people in to actually go in for the speech, which was just a Trump rally. It was just felt so antithetical to Bitcoin. And I make these comments online. I just like to poke people. And I say like, if you say this, if you do this, you're not separating money and state. You sound like you like the state. You want the state to succeed. And is this, why are you really in this? Can you just be a little bit more honest about why you're doing this? Because I think that a lot of people are pretending like, oh, I'm a libertarian or I'm an anarcho-capitalist. And the reality is, no, actually, I just want my bags pumped. I really want number go up. I want to be the nouveau riche. I want to be the next billionaire. And I think that I would love for a little more honesty within the community, because I think that a lot of people are being misled by certain cheap narratives around Bitcoin these days, and the whole origin of Bitcoin, this whole cypherpunk ethos, this resistance money that we're so proud of. We have a whole book called The Resistance Money by our fellows at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, right? And I think that tying this to political parties and playing this game with the state apparatus, I think is really dangerous and takes Bitcoin in a direction that makes me question, what is the end goal here? Because if the end goal is just for, governments to stockpile Bitcoin so that number goes up, well, that's not really what I'm here for. That's not what the Human Rights Foundation is here for. Maybe that's what David Bailey is here for, because great, number go up, right? I'm sure he's got a lot of Bitcoin. But I don't know. I'm personally hoping that we also take a step back from politics as a community. Let this go. We've got plenty of organizations that are working on this and doing lobbying, and so it's my hope that the Democrats come around, start saying, okay, this is a real industry that we can't ignore anymore, and we better start taking their calls and having our staffers meet with them, and that we see a shift in the coming years of this being less of a Republican supported thing, and that it really does become something that all politicians have a sense of and aren't, offended by.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that my analysis of this, Margot, is that they were faced with a number of different choices that happened very quickly. I think Trump in Mar-a-Lago, when he had that person, Malcolm, that had the goggles on, and he said, from the crypto perspective, they want us to go to overseas. And Trump goes, I don't want you to go overseas. I want you to stay here in America. I made NFTs great again, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, you had the Winklevoss twins come in, give money to Trump. You had Jesse Powell from Kraken come in, give money to Trump. And then you had Bitcoin miners meeting with Trump. And then you suddenly heard David Bailey chirp up and said, wait a minute, we have some things we want to do with Trump. We want to do this, strategic Bitcoin reserve. And so there was this momentum that started, right? This public momentum of how Trump was moving for an industry. And I think you're absolutely right that it probably went way too far. I was there. I was at the Trump rally, not part of the Trump rally with the shirts. And I saw that, and I was like sort of observing all of this that happened. And I think that the excitement, the exuberance, right? The libertarian mindset really took hold. But when you have somebody that's going to move to power, there's people are going to shift themselves to try to see how it can benefit. But at the end of the day, though, what I know is that, yes, I'm a Democrat. Nothing's going to change my worldview of that. And nothing's going to change my worldview of Bitcoin, of how I believe it can help unbanked people every day, of how it is this resistance money. Maybe it's going to be resistance money against Trump. We talk about the authoritarians, and I know we always get people upset at the other side anytime we throw some derogatory concept that Trump might be power hungry. But how authoritarian is Trump going to be? He made the joke, this is the last time you'll ever have to vote in an election. So it's you don't take those statements lightly, I think. And so to me, Bitcoin is this unchangeable kind of money that is for everybody. Right. And there might be this tide where we feel like there's this certain power and we have the momentum. But at the end of the day, fundamentally, this is something that I don't think anything can take away of it. And I think the people who are moving it in that way and that narrative, they're ultimately going to realize that was sort of a short-term gain and hopefully realize they didn't lose too much in the long term of what they're hoping to accomplish, with Bitcoin overall for their community and for us here in the U.S.
Yeah, I was there too. I was there in that rally. So I know this is a little digression, but I watch a lot of Trump rallies actually. And because I'm just fascinated by Donald Trump. I think he's truly an entertainer. And I'm just fascinated by the people who show up to these rallies because, he has kind of a script, but he meanders a lot and comes back to things. And I don't know, I didn't see it. His presentation at Bitcoin Magazine at the conference to me wasn't like, I'm here to give you a speech about why I think Bitcoin is awesome. It was like, I'm here, I'm just going to do my usual shtick, and I'm going to throw out a few key terms. And it kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you've seen this Family Guy episode where I think Lois, the wife, she runs for office and she just says 9/11 and everybody's like, yeah. And she's like, 9/11. And there was like, yes. And it's like 9/11. And she just keeps saying, she just says it differently, and they're just like, yeah, yes, I'm voting for you. And sometimes I feel like that's what happens with Trump. And I don't know. I just amazed. He's a phenomenon. And I'm just amazed that he ended up merged with Bitcoin. But yeah.
But isn't that the weirdest thing? That it's all like, if I may add this perspective, it's so much about entertainment on so many levels. I mean, you're talking about a Family Guy episode, and we're talking about a guy who might change the course of history of the planet, you know. And it's if I'm looking at it from what I see in the Bitcoin space, because you said so many things before, both of you, about the noise that we have, the noise in politics, the noise in the Bitcoin space, all the resistance money aspects. They're just not entertaining enough. They're too reasonable. And the things that you said about the campaign with Harris for crypto, maybe all of this is too reasonable for people. It's not entertaining. It's not an entertainer performing it. You know, it's really the movie Idiocracy happening. I'm just waiting for the Brondo advertisement in between. And if I look at it from what we see here with the Bitcoin space, I mean, I'm staying away from X for about half a year now, and it's very healthy. I recommend it to anyone. But if I look at like YouTube thumbnails of German-speaking Bitcoin influencers, this is like it looks like a field of oranges just months before the election. You know, it was Trump on thumbnails everywhere because people just found him entertaining. He generated clicks. And as you said before, Jason, maybe this is just one of the things that the Democratic Party really needs to think about more. Like maybe less reason or rep reason in more entertainment.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I was just going to imitate the way he sort of, when he said, you know, I'm going to fire Gary Gensler on day one, and everyone went crazy. And then it was almost like the entertainment in him. It's like, oh, I got to say that again. You know, I'm going to fire Gary Gensler on day one, and everyone whooped. And people saw that as like a moment where, like, wow, Trump really got, you know, how upset people were with Gary Gensler. But it's a bit of performance art, you know. And I think when you look back at the charisma of leaders we've had in modern times, you know, people think of Barack Obama, right? Bill Clinton. You know, people who are really able to carry the day. And that's what I think the Democrats need to find, is that next person who's going to have that same charisma, to have, you know, the values that we care about, you know, for America from a policy perspective, but also be able to convince people, right? Because that's what Trump can do with his rallies. Like, at the end of the day, he's a good salesperson. You know, people walk away satisfied at the end of that rally. And I think that is something that we have to remember, is you have to be able to, you know, it's like why that we said, you know, when Richard Nixon and John Kennedy did their first debate, you know, on television, Nixon wasn't prepared. He didn't take it that seriously. And Kennedy did it. And they said that cost, you know, Nixon the election. So there is something to be said for the charisma, for the showmanship. You know, the joke in what Back to the Future I always love, when they're like, you know, oh, Ronald Reagan's president in the future. Like, Ronald Reagan, the actor? What are you talking about? How could he be president? But, you know, there's some acting to it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that the entertainment component has taken over quite a bit in this election, or in, I think, elections in general. Politics in general has become more of a circus than actual content of, you know, true policy positions. And I would prefer to go back to actual policy discussions, but you know, the electorate seems to be going in a different direction. But I also think, you know, I mean, you make an interesting point with Nixon and Kennedy. Of course, Nixon just, you know, refused to wear makeup, and they claimed that he won on the radio broadcast and lost on the TV broadcast, and he looked very uncomfortable on camera. Whereas Kennedy, you know, looked like could have been a movie star, I guess, very comfortable. And that does make, you know, that is the element of television that gets brought in. And Trump is very comfortable. And I think, you know, Harris is not as comfortable in that environment. And then I think that is a kind of a tragedy of the modern era in that regard with politics, is that you do need a certain amount of that. You may be a very good politician, but if you can't be comfortable also being a performer, you know, that I think that takes away from your chances of succeeding. And Trump is an excellent performer. So he also has a certain element of honesty that people seem to really like. And I think that was another backlash against the Democrats, which was that they feel like Democrats say one thing, we're the inclusive party, but we don't actually do anything for people who need it kind of thing. So, anyway, I'm digressing. Let's get back if we want, or we can stay here.
Well, I think it's about like what we need to do going forward, which is, I think I get very tired when I hear the talking heads and pundits on TV who, from our side, from the Democratic side, who are doing nothing but talking about resisting Trump or all the different things Republicans are doing. I want to hear about what Democrats are going to do, what we're going to build. And I think that has to be the focus. But you're right, to the element of having a little bit of character, personality. I mean, my last example, I'll give it to you on this, Margot, before we go on to something else, is I was going to say to Patrick, is it's sort of like, the criticism about Biden, like, where is he wandering off into the rainforest, or did he fall asleep at the last meeting? Was he sleeping? Ronald Reagan fell asleep at a meeting one time, and it was like a nuclear briefing or something and he woke up at the end of the meeting, and instead of being defensive about it or whatever, he said, "Oh, they should put some sign on this chair behind me that said Ronald Reagan slept here," and everybody just laughed. So you have to be able to kind of have a little bit of a personality. Yeah.
I think that's lacking a little bit. Okay. So regulation. You are regulatory, Jason. I know. You know something about regulation. You have a whole background in it. You were there the last financial crisis with the FDIC. And there's a lot of regulation coming about these days, especially around transactions, privacy concerns, under the idea that we have to track money laundering, illicit transactions. And this has a pretty big effect on terms of being able to use cryptocurrency and Bitcoin in particular in as anonymous a way as possible. And the Banking Secrecy Act is something that has come up quite a bit recently in this regard, requiring exchanges to report certain transactions, things like that. And then, the question of where does this place the Bitcoin miners that are located under U.S. jurisdiction in terms of censorship of transactions. So I was just wondering, if you could give us kind of a lay of the land, I suppose, of where are we right now in this post-election world as we enter into this Trump administration? Where are we with these types of regulations, and what's the future of them under this new administration? And what should Democrats and progressives really be looking out for in terms of all of this?
Yeah. So, I don't know that this is even really a party issue on the BSA, because you have people really from both sides who have concerns about the efficacy of how the BSA has worked. And if you go back to the 1970s, when the Bank Secrecy Act originated, I think it's 1970, we had this era where people were using cash, but people using most of the cash a lot of times were involved with cocaine or things like that. And I think there was a point where they said there wasn't a dollar bill that didn't have a trace of cocaine in it. The difference was back in the 1970s, that really made Treasury officials nervous that somehow that anybody with cash was involved with money laundering. And in fact, if they found you, Margot, walking down the street with a briefcase full of cash, this happened. Treasury official could stop you, have you open up the briefcase, look through it, and if they found any traces of cocaine on any of the money, they could take the whole thing away from you. Just walk down the street. That would be it. Be gone. So there's this paranoia that they had. And now, if you look at it, the government's kind of gotten over it, right? Like they don't check your bills anymore at the store, convenience stores. Does your 20 have a little bit of cocaine, or is it being used for money laundering? They just accept your cash because you can't possibly track all of these transactions. And so I say all that to say, if we move forward to where we are right now, it's the same thing that's happening. It's nothing special. We have Treasury people who are flipping out about Bitcoin the same way they did about cash in 1970. Oh my God, what if this little bit of a Satoshi that Patrick is using went through North Korea? Does that mean that he's part of North Korea? And what are we going to do look, money laundering is used in any form of value, digital, that's just time immemorial. There will be money launderers. There will be people trying to finance terrorism, and there will be people trying to do nuclear proliferation. There needs to be safeguards in place for this. we need to protect the privacy of individuals. And I think some people are looking at the BSA standard as something that maybe needs to, some people with Trump are pushing it to let's just redo the whole system. I don't know that we need to redo the whole system, because if you look at what happened with cash, like I'm saying, we eventually got over it. We got over this paranoia, but we still have to do a lot of these safety checks to make sure that we don't have money being used by terrorists. And that's the balancing act. And I think this is, to me, the ultimate challenge that we face, Margot, in our society, is how do we balance the privacy of individuals against what nation states or terrorist organizations might do with these kinds of funds? And I don't know. I'm waiting for someone to give me a clear answer on what the right thing is to do. I don't know that there is one yet.
Yeah, I'm concerned about people who use Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies to escape these authoritarian regimes or governments, or, we could even have, people get unbanked or debanked in the US as well. And if you're trying to escape, what if you're you're a political target under Trump, right? And you need to leave the country for some reason. And you're going to very easy ways to do that with Bitcoin. The risk of you buying this, let's say on Coinbase or Kraken, and then leaving, and then this transaction gets reported to the government. Now they know who you are. They know how much money you put in there and what you left with or attempt to leave with. And then they stop you at the border, right? So I think, there's this fine line here where the benefits of this technology are in a very delicate place with these types of regulations.
And I think that's why there's the fear about like a CBDC, right? This idea of, because a CBDC would be government controlled and operated technology, right? But what you're talking about is also kind of scary, because it could be private cryptocurrencies or stable coins. But that's almost sounds like China too, right? Tracking toward the border, social credit scores, how far can you go? What type of information is the government going to use? And that's a very progressive, concept, right? Of we need to protect particularly minorities from being treated in a certain way. And that to me is something I've advocated for a long time, as to looking at Bitcoin and Lightning in particular, and some of its pseudonymous features as a way of keeping the government out of our business when it comes to digital money. And I think that's something that we need to remind our friends on the right side of the aisle about this as we move in, because that's something that they talk about caring about too, from the libertarian mindset of they want privacy. I think there is a huge opportunity for an Overton window where there can be general agreement that we don't want the government in our business when it comes to digital currency.
Yeah, I agree. I think in general, right? If I'm using cash, I expect a certain amount of anonymity as a result of using cash. My transactions are not being tracked. And I think that right now, the way the government identifies Bitcoin as property rather than as a type of currency or something with an element of both, because the dollar also has an element of both. I can use the dollar as an investment in comparison to other currencies, right? But I also can use it as a medium of exchange. And I think that people who are very enthusiastic right now about Trump and the future of Bitcoin in the US and are pushing this particular narrative of Bitcoin as property, and I think Michael Saylor is one of those people as well, I think they really have to be careful about what they're doing when you push Bitcoin strictly as property, because you're taking away this element of medium of exchange, which then protects you and hopefully gives you some of that privacy right for these transactions, or at least these smaller transactions. And actually, I want to ask you a little bit about this, because I know with the IRS, right, you're supposed to be reporting transactions, and mine, correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't sound like there's a limit on, or like a minimum of which threshold in which you have to. So like if you buy a gift card for like $5, technically that transaction should have been reported on the IRS with the IRS. Do you know the details of that?
Yes, I don't know that it's the transaction. What I'd say is that because it's deemed as property, the IRS has not yet, even though many people have made the argument over the years, there should be some de minimis exception. So, for instance, when it comes to foreign currency, if it's Japanese yen, let's say you use yen and then you got some yen from a transaction and then you bought it, but when you went to buy it, the price of yen was much higher, right? So the way our law says is up to $600 of value, you don't have to report to the IRS because that's just considered, as you say, medium of exchange of currency. And they've wanted that for Bitcoin for a while. There's been many people that have introduced that. David Schweiker, Republican from Arizona, for a long time has said there should be some de minimis exception where under $200 of any transaction on a Bitcoin, you don't have to pay taxes on. But that doesn't exist yet because the IRS is fearful. What if you at scale use that to avoid taxes? So to your point, you're right. Literally, I could get Bitcoin from you, use it to go buy ice cream, pay 1 Satoshi more in value, and I have to report that transaction to the IRS. Now, the truth is, at scale, the IRS can't possibly process all those transactions or look at them. It's just simply impractical to do. It would cost the IRS more to try to monitor every single transaction, which is why I think some kind of de minimis exception makes sense. But yes, I think because the IRS is under the United States Department of Treasury, which is first and foremost the marketing department of the US dollar, they were never going to say something like Bitcoin was a currency. They had to classify it as something other than a currency, I think, for political reasons. And I think ultimately that's why we're left with this dilemma in the US. And why sometimes I get upset when I hear people, well, I don't see people using Bitcoin at scale. It's just this digital gold. They're not really using it in day-to-day transactions. Well, why would you? If everything you have to do, you have to record the taxes on it. So it almost is if we could take that step away, maybe people might be using Bitcoin more. But maybe that was the intention, right, of that original putting on the property is so people don't use it in their day-to-day transactions.
Yeah, absolutely. We can get very conspiratorial about this, but they're very well. I mean, if somebody's really piecing all of the piece of this puzzle together about the future of this technology, it is kind of a threat to have people using Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies as a medium of exchange. It does take away a certain amount of power and control, especially nowadays where everybody or most people are cashless, for the majority of their transactions. And you have now this ledger, this private ledger of transactions through corporations, your bank. And I'm assuming that it's not so difficult for the government to go to Chase or Wells Fargo and say, yeah, I want all of the transaction history for John Doe. Right. So I do see that is a bit of a threat towards getting access to those particular details about a person's day-to-day financial transactions. So I guess I'm just saying, wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes even beyond that. It's not just the transactions. We're talking about, the monetary policy and how the Federal Reserve measures what's happening in the economy. And if you notice with, obviously, as we know, as of just yesterday, we had 100K, in the price. That was right on the heels of whether Powell had said it before, saying Bitcoin's like digital gold. He was very quickly to say it's not going to be a replacement for money. It's something. And so I think from his perspective and from the Federal Reserve's perspective, it's kind of like Facebook, like if you're not paying for something, you're the product. We are kind of the products of the Federal Reserve because they have to monitor how we're doing as consumption. Are we spending enough money? So it's almost not nefarious, but to the degree of when we're spending US dollars or doing these transactions, they can track what's happening in the consumer activities, and the Fed can, quote unquote, do their job of either raising interest rates or not to help the, quote unquote, economy based on all these numbers. But if we start using something different like Bitcoin, they have no way of really tracking what's happening. And I think that's part of the issue too, is if they can't transmit monetary policy through the currency we're using, then that's almost the loss of their purpose as an institution. And then we can get real conspiratorial after that one, right?
Yeah. Let's get really into the whole Jekyll Island and all that. We'll leave that to Marty Bent.
That's
Marty,
right. That's right.
go at
Yeah.
it. Have fun. Get into it. I know that's what Marty likes. Okay. I'm just curious now. I mean, obviously, you're a Democrat. I'm pretty sure you voted for Harris. And the Democrats lost. Not only did they lose the presidency, they lost the Senate, they lost the House. And I mean, how are you feeling? Like, people are really excited. I know we kind of talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but this. I mean, how do you feel about the future under Trump? I mean, what's your take?
First of all, Margot, I want to say how much I admire you from that night, and that we were both Democrats in the kind of the trenches together. And even though we really didn't talk about it too much, I sort of felt that same thing of we kind of had to stick up for our party almost. And you had taken some flack toward the end, which was all in kind of good fun, but it got pretty pushy, And I think that was, maybe we can chalk that up to the excitement of election night and what was happening. But I think that's, to me, the danger, right? Of, to one degree or another, I think the Democrats probably did take it and lost a little bit because of what Gary Gensler had been doing. And I think to the degree there was a criticism, the votes, stood to take a referendum maybe on this particular industry and say Democrats hadn't been doing a good job. And I think Biden, there was some real unforced errors that occurred with that. And so I think that at the end of the day, Democrats have a chance to really revisit the topic, kind of go back to zero, is my opinion. Just go back right to the drawing board, figure out where we stand. I think that it is, I'm not worried anytime I see this sort of trifecta happen, because it doesn't mean that they're going to get everything they want. In fact, sometimes they may not get much of anything that they want because they can't agree on much, and it gets to be very partisan. So I think there are huge lessons to be learned and huge worry. What I worry about with Trump is what I think we were talking about this at the beginning of the show, but is Margot, is a little bit of the rhetoric, because of somebody who's like Trump, who almost allows for this idea of dunking on the other side or being a winner and, smashing down the loser kind of thing. And I think when you see that sort of fester, right, where it affects the day-to-day parlance and conversations people are having, that's something that I worry about. And that's something where I feel like for some time in this country, we've had less of an ability to have dialogue, of getting along with each other and working things in a bipartisan way. And I think at the end of the day, you have to agree ultimately, Bitcoin, if you take the number go up part out of it, is a bipartisan issue. And so I think that we have to remind ourselves as a society that just as Patrick was saying earlier, that Trump has that lightning rod sort of, ability to entertain people. He also has that ability to get other people to act in a way that can be very dangerous.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is the thing that attracted me. One of the aspects that attracts me to Bitcoin is that I really felt that you could look past these differences and find common ground through a shared goal with this technology. And I share this concern that what we've seen is this decisiveness being brought into a space that typically allows for people to look past those particular personal or political views. And so I'm hoping that it doesn't stay, this isn't a permanent feature. And I think that it won't be, because I think that you're right, that it's not going to be easy, even if the Republicans dominate every, part of the government, right? The House, the Senate, the executive, the Supreme Court's pretty conservative, but yeah, I think there's a lot of differences within the Republican Party that are going to also play out. And the margins are still pretty close between the number of seats that the Democrats hold versus the number of seats the Republicans hold. So I'm very interested in seeing where that plays out and whether that kind of, brings people back down to earth a little bit and say like, okay, yeah, my side won, but what it didn't really turns out it's not that easy. It still didn't get everything wanted. So I'm hopeful. Gridlock can be good.
Yeah. And that movie, Good Will Hunting with the Matt Damon, there's always that scene where he's talking to the guy and he says, you could just have this like boring life or whatever. To me, Margot, like if you chose the side and you kind of turn into this Republican and now you're going to do what every Republican does, which is be like low on regulation and let's like make a lot of money and have low taxes. And that's what, crypto is going to be all about. To me, that's pretty boring. You can do that in any industry. Bitcoin's different because it provides this lightning rod of things across the board of so many different ways that we can change the world, And so if you were in it for the number go up, to me, that's kind of a boring concept, right? At the end of the day, you're going to come back to it, like, wait a minute, what, and I think maybe that's the thing is people need to go back is what did you first learn when you got into Bitcoin? Because the politics can get very noisy, but what was your Bitcoin origin story? And that to me is what I know for me is this is why this is much more. And that's why I'm glad, by the way, when I hear people like Lopp and others, Jameson Lopp, and they're on Twitter and they're saying, I'm not that excited about the price. There's so many much more interesting features to Bitcoin than the price. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had fun with it, but again, I'm not in it for a number go up. I'm in it for other reasons. I mean, my initial interest was that I was trying to help content creators who were being deplatformed from content creator websites like Patreon. So for me, that was having Bitcoin exist as a monetary system outside of the existing financial system, to me, is the most powerful component. And I don't ever want to see that disappear. So yeah, let's get back to basics. Why did we start in Bitcoin? What brought us here? All right, progressives, why are you in Bitcoin? Get back to that. Yay, number went up, but now let's get back to work. And let's get other progressives to get into Bitcoin because this is a nonpartisan technology. It's for everyone, anyone who needs it. And I think that should be our mission going forward, figuring out how we can bring Bitcoin back to this nonpartisan position. So, Jason, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. It's always so great to talk with you. I love running into you at conferences and at events. You're one of my most favorite people in this space. So, thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
All right, everyone, that wraps up our interview with Jason Brett. Now we have our Bitcoin moment of Zen. Enjoy.
I have so many friends that were Bernie or bust. And when you didn't win in 2016 or 2020, they bust. They checked out of politics and then they hard pivoted into Bitcoin.
Really?
Then they pivoted into ketamine and Zen. Let's see where that goes. But they are despondent. What do you say to my friends who now feel like you may be falling in line a little bit too much with the corporate democratic establishment?
At this particular moment in history, and perhaps in any moment in history, despair is not an option. To say, well, I supported Bernie, he didn't win, I'm going into Bitcoin. Sorry, not good enough.
That's going to be your most controversial statement of this whole interview.
All right, so I think if you are a human being who wants to live in a sane and decent society, who is concerned about your kids, you know what? Sorry, you don't have a right to check out. That's a privilege you don't have. I lost, I was there, I'm not dropping out. You gotta look at the world as it is and do the best you can. And people can disagree, Hassan, what is the best? How do we go forward? But dropping out is certainly not one of the options.